Hi, my name is Baraz Ranjbari Saisan, and this is going to be my research project on the relationship between drugs and crime and incarceration. This is for my CGS 380 Methods class with Dr. Harris of the spring semester in 2024, Cal State University, Northridge. For my introduction, this study of my research topic will examine the significance of drug use and its impact on the criminal justice system and crime rates. My research hypothesis is that use of drugs directly impacts crime and incarceration rates. An example of current literature is that 1 in 5 people are currently locked up for drug-related offenses. My research problem at hand is that people who use drugs are more prone to finding themselves breaking the law. My explanation of this problem is that people who use drugs are already breaking the law, and when an individual is under the influence of drugs, they can be potentially hallucinating and not aware of what they are doing. Some common crimes committed under the influence of drugs include theft, burglary, or even buying drugs and selling drugs. This is going to be my references page. This is where I'm going to refer to statistics and data that I found through the websites and online. In a study conducted by the Bureau of Justice Statistics, research showed that about 20% reported that offenders were under the use of drugs alone or in combination with alcohol. In another research article on drugs and crime in America, research stated that approximately 60% of individuals arrested for most types of crimes test positive for illicit drugs at the time of arrest. These statistics are an example of quantitative data which shows the relationship between drug use and crime and incarceration. Moving forward, this is going to be my literature review section on drugs and impact on crime and incarceration. For my first source, I will look at the article titled, "What is the Relationship Between Drug Use and Crime?" by Kathleen G. Alvarado. The purpose of this article is to prove a relationship between the use of drug and correlation with crime, looking at the convictions of drug offenses and incarceration rate. As a review, over half of the millions of incarcerated are serving time for drug-related offenses. Looking at some of the drug-related offenses being marijuana, which is now legal, that goes to show that a lot of the people who were incarcerated a long time ago when drugs such as marijuana were still illegal. Motivational uses for drug use causes drug users to be addicted and look for illegal opportunities to obtain drugs. For my second literature review source, The Nexus Between Drugs and Crime Theory, Research and Practice by Arthur J. Larugio and James A. Schwartz. The purpose of this article is to prove the correlation of drug use through theories, research, and practices, addressing several acts passed throughout the years that play a significant role in illicit drug use. So going back to what I was mentioning earlier, this article looks at the population of drug users, such as the poor, undereducated, and unemployed. People who live in a poverty neighborhood and are undereducated and unemployed are more likely to look for drugs or turn to criminality. Illicit drug users disproportionately commit crimes and are at higher risk for becoming involved in criminal justice system. For my source number 3, I will be looking at the article A Comprehensive Analysis of the Drug-Crime Relationship by Michael A. Powell. The purpose of this article is that it looks at analysis of the relationship between drugs and crime, uses quantitative data to analyze and compare current and past drug-related offenses. So this article looks at the past and present United States drug policies, such as the War on Drugs Act, which affected the drug and crime scene substantially. Mentioning earlier how marijuana was illegal at one point, and then now it is legal, some of those people are still locked up. Part of this can be contributed to the War on Drugs Act, which locked some people up for a very long time for drugs such as marijuana. Looks at the time points like the 1980s, when the crack cocaine flooded the streets and led to the increase in homicide rates. So For my research questions, my main research question is how do the use of drugs affect the crime rate and number of individuals incarcerated, and how does it relate to one another? For my secondary research question, do people who use narcotics turn to crime as an opportunity for income, or is it because of the environment that they are influences their choices? For types of research, the research conducted will use both qualitative and quantitative data and offer a mixed methods approach. Quantitative data mainly focuses on numbers and statistics, whereas qualitative is a more first person and more in-hand approach to the data. Using secondary archival data and interviewing a current police officer and friend, I was able to gather information to express my topic. This information will help by combining archival data to personal perspective of a current police officer who is familiar with the topic and relationship with the question at hand. For my steps taken to gather my research, I had to first pick credible sources to gather data from. I then had to acquire data from each source that answers my research questions. I had to look at secondary sources and explain how it supports my research. I chose a knowledgeable professional who is a current LAPD officer and a good friend of mine to obtain information from that I can use towards my research. I interviewed the officer and used the data with a few interesting questions for him. I piled up all my data to use in research and present the findings. For my methods, the methods I use in the research is a mixed methods approach. I chose this method because it allows me to explain the information more accurately. This method approach allowed me to mix up the data and get my point across more clearly. A mixed method approach is more effective than a single focus approach because it adds more diversity to the research and allows you to attack from different angles. My core findings: I found that drugs tend to have a correlation to increase in crime rates, but causation is harder to prove. A lot of the drug offenses that led to inmates being incarcerated for long years happened in the 80s and 90s, with War on Drugs Act and US being tougher on drugs. Many inmates within jail are under the influence of drugs at 50%. Many individuals that are addicted to drugs try to find a way to obtain drugs, usually illegally. Many individuals who enter jail are already under the influence of drugs, and jail only makes it easier to access drugs. The environment in which individuals live can highly impact their drug use and criminality. So this is a continuation on my core findings. This is looking at my interviewee, which was the LAPD officer that I interviewed and my good friend. The LAPD officer provided information that a lot of calls that he deals with are drug-related offenses. The most common type of drug-related offenses he encountered is drug possession and sales. Many people who are homeless are under influence of drugs, and many individuals who are addicted to drugs commonly go in and out of jail and fall into a repetitive cycle of drug use and addiction. My theory application, the theory I used to explain this, is the strain theory by Robert K. This theory states that the pressure derived from social factors such as lack of income or lack of quality education drives individuals to commit crime. The interpretation of theory and drug use in crime. Individuals who are in poverty areas will engage in more crime, such as drug use, or may even use drugs and commit crime. In essence, someone who with a low education level, unemployed, and facing financial pressure will turn to drugs and crime more likely than someone not facing those problems. So the environment plays a huge factor and huge role into the decisions made by these individuals that are obtaining drugs and turning to criminality. So this section is the practicality of my data. So for my research questions, drug use in relation to crime, environmental and pressure factors. For my archival themes, I put that drug-related offenses, use of drugs while committing crime. Pressure of engaging in drug use or criminal behavior due to situation. In my findings category, many of those who are in jail are under the influence of drugs, and many of those committed crimes were also under the influence of drugs. Socioeconomic factors play a vital role in both drug use and criminality, and financial pressure is the main reason one turns to drugs and criminality. Meaning, basically, if someone is under pressure financially or economically, they will turn to crime and drugs more times than not than someone who isn't facing those problems. And a lot of the people who are in jail were already under the influence when they went to jail. And as they were already in jail, they found more drugs, and it just led to a more repetitive cycle. Some complications that I ran through gathering my data was that proving causality and not only correlation. So the relationship between drugs and crime and incarceration, it's easy to prove that there is a correlation between the two, but proving the causality is a lot harder. So finding a direct link between drugs and crime rate and incarceration was something that I struggle with. And then linking theories to explain the thought process for committing crimes while on the use of drugs or drug-related. This goes back to the strain theory, which I believe explained the thought process for committing crimes while on the use of drugs or being drug-related. And also finding credible sources with useful information about the relationship between drugs and crime. That's why I provided both qualitative and quantitative data. For qualitative data, I interviewed the LAPD officer, and for quantitative data, I added statistical numbers and data that I gathered through research. Impact that this has and its importance is that proving that there is a cause for crime under or with use of illicit drugs sheds light on the drug and crime problem throughout the U.S. and showing that there is a relationship between the two. For causation, showing that the use of drugs and narcotics can have a link to crime. Distinguishing factors that cause the relationship, such as environment and past and present drug laws. And then my reference page. So to conclude, drugs and crime and incarceration have a relationship, and not only are they directly correlated, drugs can be a causation for crime. Depending on the person's environment and pressure that they're facing financially or economically, this end result can influence them to turn to crime or drugs. Thank you for my presentation, listening to my presentation, and I hope everybody has a great day.